Yes.
How are you, Dick?
I think I'm doing okay, thank you.
How is Sid? That I haven't heard from him for a while.
Well, that's a complicated and not very happy story. He's not very well.
Oh,
Ah,
And indeed, right now, he's hospitalized.
oh, shit. Do you think I can call him?
Not yet. He is not, basically his connections by phone are more or less blocked. His son, his elder son visits him quite frequently. And if you email him, Christopher may be able to read your email to him when he visits.
I don't think I have his mail.
Right afterwards, I will forward to you his email address, okay?
Perfect. Thank you, Dick.
Yes.
I think we can begin. What do you think?
Sorry to hear about that.
Yep.
Rajesh, do you want to say something, or shall I just introduce?
Please, no, you please go ahead. I don't
Okay.
want to say anything. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I think we can start. The panel is coming.
We'll start. Well, I'm chairing the panel today, and thank you for everybody for joining us on this second panel, which is also, as you know, the closing event of the Freeman lecture series. We are, as with the previous panel, we're dividing it up into basically 3 hours in different topics, which the panelists will, they have some flexibility, but they will probably want to direct their comments in part, at least, to the topics of the particular hour. And we will start with Dick Nelson, who's agreed to give an opening statement and to talk a little bit about Chris Freeman's research, as well as some of his thoughts on the themes of the panel today. Then we'll have Francisco Louça, followed by Susan Cozzens, and then Giovanni Dosi, and that'll be the first hours. And the broad theme for the first hour is Freeman's thinking and its relevance for the Global South, as you probably know. Then we're going to save 5 to 10 minutes for questions. So if you have questions, I would ask you to direct them to me using the chat function or the discussion function. And I will take down the questions, and if there are multiple questions on the same theme, try to group them. And then these can be addressed to all the panelists or one panelist. So we'll have 5 to 10 minutes to have some questions and answers. The second theme is policy and politics. And the 4 panelists are Franco, Malerba, Lorenz, Klerkx, Judith Francis, and Michiko Iizuka. And it'll be the same procedures. Each panelist will have 12 to 13 minutes to present some of their thoughts on this broad theme, and then we'll have questions again. At that point, there's a 10-minute break, and Rajesh will be presenting. Rajesh, tell us a little bit about what you will do during the 10-minute break, please.
So during the break, we have 2 items. One is a report based on the recent survey we have conducted. The second is a formal vote of thanks. So we take 4 plus 4 minutes, approximately 8 minutes, not more than that.
Okay. Then the third hour, which has the theme of New Horizons for Innovation Systems Approach, there are three panelists. There's Charles Edquist, Smita Srinivas, and Xiaolan Fu. And again, we'll save some time for questions. And then at the very end, there will be a closing statement by Bentok Lundvall for closing the entire lecture series. And that, but that should take us a little bit past 10 to 15 minutes past the hour, the third hour, wherever you are located, your time zone. And again, if you have to ask a question, you use what the thing is. I don't have it in French. It says discussion. I think it's chat. I don't know what it says in English, but you can just direct. If you go on that function, you can direct a question to me, and I will convey it to the panelists. Okay. So I think we can then go ahead, and it's a great pleasure to have Richard Nelson here, who has agreed to start off the panel.
Well, I'm very, very happy to do that. And I'd like to begin by thanking on behalf of all of us, Klerkx and the others who have put together this wonderful series honoring Chris. What I find continuingly amazing is the enormous range of people and institutions that have had contact with Chris over the years, and with which Chris and Sprue have enormously influenced. If you look at the cast of characters on these meetings, what I'm struck by is that we're now in the third generation of those of us who have been strongly influenced by Chris. His immediate students have gone on, and many of them established similar institutions to Sprue in their home countries. And they in turn have had students who are now distinguished scholars. It is really, really quite remarkable. I first came in contact with Chris and Sprue when I was a young scholar, just coming up, doing research on innovation and technological advance. In my scan of the reading and the articles that were in the area, and it was just beginning to bloom at that time, I relatively quickly spotted Chris and wrote to him, and we started a correspondence in 1973. I spent a wonderful semester at Sprue, which has just strongly influenced the way I think about things in general, just as contact with Chris has influenced all of you. Let me go over a bit what attracted me so much to Sprue and Chris, and what has really shaped me ever since. And I suspect many of you would identify the same range of things. First of all, while right from the beginning, Sprue's focus and Chris's writings were focused on technology and science and how they co-evolved. The orientation that he had was an exceedingly broad one to that. At about the time Sprue was coming into existence, there was the formation of a small group of scholars concerned with innovation in the United States, of which I was a member, and also scholars like Klerkx and Ed Mansfield. A number of us put together in the early years a volume called The Rate and Direction of Inventive Activity, which many of you have read. What is striking about virtually all those studies, and they were very good studies, many of them were indeed, was that they were focused largely on how technological change came about. And what was quite striking as I came to know Chris and got more and more influenced by the ambiance of Sprue was that the point of view on technological advance that was taken here was much broader than that. I think last week there was a bit of discussion about the relationship of Chris and what he had learned from Schumpeter. But if you reflect on Schumpeter was not writing simply about technical change. He was basically using and thinking about technical change as the central activity that was going on and driving what modern capitalism had become. And similarly regarding Chris and Sprue, his main interest and focus was on how do modern economies work? And he saw technological advance and the scientific establishment that lay behind much of it as a central ingredient of that. His main focus was on how do modern economies work. Another very important element of Chris's work and Sprue's work in general that affected me enormously, though I was inclined to go in that direction in the first place, was that the orientation to research and analysis was to look at the empirics first and then to theorize about them later. The orientation was to theorizing and conceptualization as a way of explaining relatively well-documented empirical phenomena that needed to be explained and understood. I would highlight that is and continues to be, somewhat unfortunately, a different point of view regarding the role of theory and empirical work than Marx economics at that time and much of the social science discipline at that time and to a continuing extent, where in a sense the connection is reversed. And the notion is that you start with theory and the importance of empirical work is to test the theory. That is a very, very different point of view regarding how to do research in the relationship between empirical work and the development of theory and understanding than has been standard in much of the social sciences at that time. A third striking element of the work at Sprue, which very much reflected what Chris was oriented to, was that the conceptualization was broad. Chris didn't start out his research from a point of view that reflected his training in economics, but rather in a very open-minded way. And the orientation was to the empirical understanding, and the empirical understanding would take on board notions from economics, from sociology, from political science, from history. There's a general notion of interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary work as in some sense or other taking what is learned in particular disciplines and applying many of them to what is going on empirically in the field that you're studying. But again, that wasn't the interdisciplinarity that I found at Sprue. Rather, the orientation was to understanding the empirical phenomena that was being analyzed as best one could, drawing on elements from the social sciences and from history. But again, it's the understanding of the empirical phenomena that is driving the analysis and driving the theorizing, rather than the theorizing essentially focusing and determining the point of view you take on the empirical phenomena. A fourth and absolutely important aspect of what was going on with Chris and his whole style of research and orientation over the years, and the way Sprue was oriented was that while the research often was very, very basic in terms of what it was looking at and the nature of the inquiry going on, Sprue and Chris were always interested in research and teaching that would make for a better world. There was always a strong normative orientation to what on at Sprue. Again, not one that was focused on particular ways of improving matters, but rather empirically focusing on the important things that are going on, trying to understand these, and drawing from that orientation evaluations and propositions regarding how policy ought to proceed. It was quite natural that this point of view would lead to the development of a body of research and writing concerned with national innovation systems. And a number of us who had been connected with Sprue sort of were coming to that orientation in the same way. If I have time later on, I'll make a few more comments about the national innovation systems or the innovation systems work and where it might be fruitfully going. But here, I want to highlight one aspect of it. An essential perspective in the innovation systems work was that many different types of institutional actors are involved in the process of innovation and technological change. While economists tended to focus almost exclusively on the role of for-profit business firms and profit-oriented entrepreneurs, the innovation systems work broadened out that institutional orientation very broadly and recognized a much larger range of institutions. Some of them governmental, some of them private, not-for-profit, interacting in a variety of ways, not simply through markets in the innovation process. And this was fundamental. I may pick up on this later on in the session. But finally, let me turn to Globelix, which is clearly an institution spawned by Sprue. It was quite natural that Sprue and Chris would take in and on board scholars from developing countries. Chris and others at Sprue were very much interested in the development process and the process of catching up. And here I will simply mention, and again, in addition to Chris, there was Charles Cooper, who was early at it. There was Martin Bell, who played such an enormous role in that development. And Keith Pavitt also influenced so many of you from developing countries. The focus here again was specially Sprue and differed from what was going on in development economics. It was on capability building and learning as contrasted with capital formation. And with that, let me turn it over and back to the assembled group.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks very much for that discussion and about Chris's work and the strong empirical content and motivation in the research. I think that's we'd see in the innovation systems research has continued. Yeah, if you have some comments later to come back in on the specific themes that we're talking about, please do. We'll just then go right ahead on Luca's presentation. Of course, you know his work on agriculture innovation systems. Perhaps he's going to talk about that. I don't know, but I'll pass it on to Francisco now. Thank you, Francisco. Take the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Edward. Let me thank the organizers of these lectures and welcome you all. This is a wonderful opportunity to discuss Freeman's work and the development of the field of evolutionary economics. Well, of course, we know that Chris Freeman was one of the most important, one of the leading economists for the second half of the 20th century on evolutionary economics, with Dick Nelson, Sid Winter, so many of the other speakers of these lectures. And I believe that his contribution centered on two main topics: opening the black box of innovation and developing a research program on the long-term dynamics and adaptation of capitalism, of the modern economy. In that sense, he was one of those who framed the concept of evolution and of evolutionary economics, which is the one I would like to discuss briefly. Stiglitz, some 20 years ago, wrote, and I quote, let me find the quote, "The development of evolutionary economics is, I think, one of the most important unfinished legacies of the 20th century. The movement from equilibrium models derived from physics to evolutionary dynamic models derived from biology and ecology represents an important change in the mode of thinking." That's what I would like to discuss, because in a way, there's a lot of ambiguity in the concept of evolution. We inherit that from Marshall in his preface, saying that the mecca of economics is biology, which of course he did not develop. And also from Schumpeter, by the way. Not so many of our colleagues noticed that Schumpeter, in his first important book, the 1911 book on the theory of economic development, firmly rejected the concept of evolution. So he wrote all kinds of evolutionary thought that center in Darwin are metaphysical tendencies, no more than reasoning by analogy, and the evolutionary idea is now discredited in our field, especially with historians, because of its extra scientific mysticism that now surrounds the evolutionary ideas, to be added to that part of dilettantism. With all the hasty generalizations he wrote, in which the word evolution plays a part, many of us lost patience. We must get away from such things. Well, of course, Schumpeter changed his idea, and in the history of economic analysis, and in so many, and if not all, the books he wrote in the 20s and the 30s, and in this last book, which is the history of economic analysis, he wrote that social phenomena constitute a unique process in historic time, and incessant and irreversible changes are their most obvious characteristic. If by evolutionism, we mean not more than the recognition of this fact, then all reasoning about social phenomena must be either evolutionary in itself or else bear upon evolution. So that's the sense of evolution. So it could be an allegory for economics, so it could be a driving metaphor for organizing our thoughts, or for naming social evolution as such. Now, I would like to point out some of the contributions by Chris Freeman in order to narrow the sense of the concept of evolution. And I will mention it very briefly in two debates he addressed, which are not so well known among his students, and I think that they should be. One is the discussion on Lamarck, and the other is the discussion on Spencer, meaning neoclassical economics. Well, to put briefly on the first, well, Lamarck has been noticed in evolutionary economics as a more apt version than Darwin's to frame the concepts of evolution. Of course, because Lamarck would point out that the evolution of species is driven by the environment and by adaptation. So the species develop their own characteristics according to the context in which they live. Well, many of the writers in evolutionary economics notice that this is not adequate for biology. This is wrong. But it could be used as a metaphorical reference. Well, why is it rejected in biology? It's a matter of importance for the economists' use of the concept. Indeed, it is considered to be wrong because it suggests a process of selection in which, in Lamarck, there is no uncertainty. It's a finalist process. That's why, by the way, when he was writing The Origin of the Species, Darwin wrote to a colleague, Lyell, saying that he did not incorporate a single fact or idea from Lamarck. And this co-founder of the theory of evolution, Wallace, was much more outspoken. So he wrote that, I quote, "The hypothesis of Lamarck has been repeatedly and easily refuted by all writers on the subject of evolution." And the reason was because for Lamarck, evolution has a destiny, and this is meaningless in social complex evolution. But now the second topic is even more important for us to understand what we mean, or what we want to mean by evolution, and that's the discussion on Spencer, meaning the concept of the survival of the fittest, or the concept of the struggle for existence, which Darwin used and which has been taken in economics by relevant writers. Friedrich Hayek was one of the most important. He wrote, "In many respects," I quote, "Darwinism is the culmination of a development which Mandeville, the fable of the bees, more than any other man has started." But there is a debate introducing this concept of the survival of the fittest, which was taken up by Chris Freeman. And that's the debate between Armand Alchian, a neoclassical economist following all these concepts, and Edith Penrose. Alchian was the one who introduced in neoclassical economics something which is not quite common, but it was important at the time, which was the concept of evolution. So he wrote, well, if there is uncertainty, the concept of general equilibrium and convergence to general equilibrium becomes meaningless. There's no salvation from that. So profit maximization is not an adequate description of a phenomena under uncertainty. So he proposed to replace it by not the concept of maximization, by the realization of positive profits as the criterion for viability, and that would be the survival of the fittest. Alchian developed it quite a lot. The economic counterparts, he wrote, of genetic heredity, mutations, and natural selection are imitation, innovation, and positive profits. Now, another economist, Edith Penrose, attacked Alchian's view, and her attack was supported and developed by Chris Freeman. She just said and wrote that this is a tricky business, using an analogy, because you carry some analogy from one field in which problems are well defined to illuminate another field in which they are not. So this obscures rather than clarifies, and the behavioral imitation which species can follow cannot be compared to social evolution. We have purposeful action, we have strategies, we have development of a social organization. And in that sense, Chris wrote, Edith Penrose made perhaps the most devastating critique of the biological analogies in her attack on the analogy between the growth of animals and the growth of firms and other attempts of that kind. So Chris not only followed Edith Penrose, suspecting the general use of analogies in order to create a new foundation of scientific reason. There are serious dangers, you know. But he also addressed the main topic, and I will finish, that imitation and the development of the process of innovation has layers of complexity in social determination, which cannot be paralleled to the biological evolution. And so, he wrote, in the end, social scientists have really no alternative but to go beyond analogies and to develop their own evolutionary models. So economists should investigate the interdependencies and the relations in social life and in economic evolution. And that's what he addressed. Well, the concept of the natural systems of innovation or other concepts or models, formal models, agent-based models, other forms of approaches, try to address and to encapsulate formally or in a historical narrative the understanding of the very process of evolution, and they are not framed in the context of this maximization or survival of the fittest or Spencerian analogy coming out from biology, which of course was what Milton Friedman, more than other one, developed as a career in scientific methodology. So I believe that Chris Freeman was right to take back Edith Penrose, that she was right to attack this version of evolution from neoclassical economists, and that we should thank them for the inspiration in all those battles.
Francesco, thanks very much for this discussion and to bring us into some of these core issues about different ways of understanding evolutionary theorizing and what's relevant to our work in innovation systems and what how it relates to neoclassical thinking. We'll just move right on to Susan Cozzens, who's the third presenter in this hour. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Susan, you are mute. Please unmute.
Just trying to get into slideshow mode. And can you confirm you've got my whole screen up now? All right, great. I want to thank the organizers very much for inviting me to join this wonderful panel and this wonderful series, both Rajesh and his organizing committee, because this is really what the Globalix community needed in this time when we're all so physically separated. And so we're really grateful to you. The next big event, of course, is the Globalix conference, which will be in Costa Rica in the fall. The health conditions are right to have a face-to-face meeting in Costa Rica. So we certainly hope you'll all go out to globalix.org, find that extended deadline for in the call for papers, get your papers in this month. And if you can, join us personally in Costa Rica, but if you can't, you will have an option to present your work from wherever you are. So what I'm doing today, it happens to be morning where I am, is addressing the question of how science, technology, and innovation policies can help reduce inequalities. And even this question starts with Chris Freeman. When I started working on the topic about 20 years ago, basically there were 2 chapters by Chris Freeman that were almost the only things that you had to cite on analysis in this area. He had connected the rising levels of inequality in affluent societies to the technological paradigms and long ways work and noted that inequality tends to rise when there's a major new technology that's spreading through the system because the relations of the ownership of the means of production change and the ground rules therefore change. So he then focused in and showed in one chapter the way the technological change affects income distribution through unemployment and through wages, and linked that the long swings in technological change to long swings in social policies as well, in the set of policies that actually deal with distribution in various ways. So what he was calling for at that point was, he said, well, when we have this technological change, we then need to invent new institutions to make sure that all of society benefits from that change and not just the narrow group that owns the new means of production. And he saw those policies then as social policies and tax policies. And this is actually a very common idea in this area, which is technological change increases inequality, innovation increases inequality, and some other set of policies solves the problem. So what I'm going to be presenting for you today is actually the other argument, which is that we also need to use the STI policies to reduce those inequalities and not leave them to somebody else to worry about. So since that time that Freeman was working, of course, we have a lot more attention to inequalities out there, both in the public and in the scholarly community. The recession in 2009 and 2010 brought up the Occupy movement, very strong focus on that top 1%. They've got all our money, we are the 99%. And then Piketty's remarkably popular and widely read work on capital in the 21st century, at which he says, oh, this is just going to get worse. Capital growth is going to outpace wage growth, and we really have to tackle that capital growth issue. Another manifestation at the international level is the way that inequality was built into the Sustainable Development Goals, which include SDG 10, is actually reducing inequality within and among countries. And that whole concept applies to the whole world, not just to the global South. Let me just double check that you can see my slides. Is that right, Rajesh?
That's fine. We see them, yes.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
So the question is still, do the science, technology, and innovation policies need to pay attention to this phenomenon? And in this really short presentation, I can't give you all of the work that's been done over the last 20 years, but the answer is definitely yes, that they do, because what we've found is that unless they're specifically designed to do otherwise, STI policies do increase inequality, just kind of incrementally. It's just like a little gear working in the economy, and things ratchet up. So what we've been focusing on in the Globalix community largely is how to redesign those STI policies so that they make a significant difference, so that it's both a little gear grinding in the other direction and maybe having a really big impact. There are a number of different kinds of redesigns that the scholarly community has proposed for addressing that issue. There's a lot of writing that focuses on where the innovation is happening. Is it in the informal economy? That is such a big part of so many economies in the global South. That would be a really important place to generate more employment. Is there grassroots innovation going on from villagers and other places, rather than in the big firms that the economics of innovation in the North is typically focused on? Is it frugal innovation? This is a style in which the innovation happens under conditions of scarcity, and therefore you get a lot more benefit for lower inputs. Does it involve social enterprise that's aimed at actually changing something structurally in society? There's another set of proposals that have to do with the directionality. Whose problems are actually being addressed in the innovation that's going on. Of course, this has become a major theme under the new Sussex Manifesto, where distribution is built right into the attention, where directionality is also built in. And then my colleagues and I have developed some categories of redesigns that really focus on where in the income distribution you're looking to use innovation to make improvements. So we distinguish among pro-poor innovations, which have that directionality at the bottom of the income distribution, egalitarian ones, which I'm not going to talk about today at all because of time, which reduce inequalities across culturally defined groups like genders, and then equalizing ones that actually change the structure of the economy in an equalizing direction. So here's a kind of picture of where those different forms focus. The pro-poor ones focus at the lowest end of the income distribution. The structural ones are focused in the middle of the income distribution. But what you may have noticed was missing on our list was things focusing up there at the top 1% folks, where a lot of the popular attention has been given. So I do want to talk for just briefly about that upper end of the distribution, because it is really important. Things have gotten worse in that set of issues under the pandemic. A very good recent report from Oxfam outlining the ways, and well, the richest people in the world have just gotten much richer. And if they just took the new money that they made during COVID and applied it to the needs that we have now, a lot of needs would be met. But even before that, these numbers are just dramatic. When you've got 26 people who own as much as half of humanity, then you know you've got something serious. But on the slide, the list of ways that Oxfam analyzed that the rich people get richer, and none of those is an STI policy route. So again, the question is, does STI policy really need to pay attention to this issue? And when you just look at who those rich people are, it becomes really obvious that the answer is yes. This is the latest picture that Forbes has of billionaires in the world economy, and it's much more diverse than the actual billionaire set. In fact, the 10 richest people in the world are all men. They are not as diverse as this picture, and 7 of them are men in the US who have made their fortunes in the technology business. Elon Musk off on the edge a little bit, but the rest of them are right in technology. So yes, there is a connection between what we do and that accumulation of wealth at the top of the income distribution. Can we redesign STI policies to address any of that? A place that we definitely need to look is in the amount of spending that the US does on military research and development, because that was kind of the infrastructure on which a lot of that IT fortunes were built, but also intellectual properties. And maybe we can talk about those a little more in discussion, or maybe a discussion even later in the session. So if we talk about how can we have a big impact by doing things at the bottom end of the income distribution, then we really need to be talking about livelihoods. Are we doing things with the policies at that lower end with people who are really poor now that help them actually have a steadier income, a safer income? And so the informal economy, grassroots innovation concepts are quite important there, and they're really important for development to make sure that everyone are agents and not patients. It's not someone else who's solving the problem. And then in the middle of the income distribution, the focus also needs to be on livelihoods. What kind of work is there? So in the middle of the income distribution, those equalizing strategies should sound really familiar. It's just focusing the innovation process at producing middle skill, middle wage jobs, which is certainly kind of should be built into local economic development rather than focusing only on high-end jobs. I call this approach trickle down from the middle, and here's how the middle income jobs actually help the people at the bottom. because if you get those middle income jobs, people are out in the neighborhoods, they're in medium-sized industries, there's a lot more of the auxiliary and supporting work that's generated broadly. So they help people at the bottom, and there are more of them. They help much more than the producing jobs at the top. So we can't leave this without talking about those directionality options. Ned, I have no idea how well I'm doing on time, but I'll count
could you take one more minute?
I can. All right.
Thanks.
So there are pro-poor directionality options too, and they have gotten a lot of attention. Innovations for the bottom of the pyramid and the frugal innovations. And I just wanted to flash up one example from India of a social enterprise that that used frugal innovation to make eye surgery accessible to poor families using a sliding scale, and generated a lot of those middle wage, middle skill jobs, largely for women in this just expanding area of medical services in India. So just to review, the leverage points include redirecting public R&D toward those global needs rather than things like defense spending, using directionality in the health investments, and lifting the middle, creating middle wage, middle skill jobs so that we get that nice trickle down effect. And then there are some qualitative options too. Thank you very much for your attention on this. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks. There we go. Well, that was very stimulating, Susan. Thanks very much. In fact, that raises an issue about some of the literature on technology and job polarization, which says that apparently the middle income occupations and jobs are decreasing. But we can maybe come back to that. So we'll move right forward on to Giovanni's presentation, and then we'll have. I've had a few questions sent to me, so we'll go to these questions after that.
Okay, well, what Chris's thought has to do with the global south. I'm going to say things that the friends that preceded me already said in part. A lot. Chris's thought has to do a lot with the global south. In fact, Chris's is an ambitious theory of economic development. And as such, is meant to apply both to nowadays industrialized countries as well as developing ones. And I invite everyone to reread, if you have not read it yet, Historical Evolution and Economic Growth, this long paper by Chris that I republished in 2019 on industrial and corporate change. It was written originally in '95 for a project that I was coordinating at Xiaolan near Vienna, but never published. Well, there you have a sort of theory of history, an ambitious theory of history, in which, in a nutshell, it says what accounts for modern economic development is the coupled dynamics of 5 relatively autonomous co-evolving subsystems. The scientific knowledge, first. The technological system, second. The economic machine, that is the processes that generate investment, consumption, income distribution, growth. Fourth, the political setup. And the fifth, the cultural system. And it is the matching, the tuning between these 5 subsystems and their coupled dynamics which accounts for the fact that the country develops originally, accounts for the fact that England took off for the first time in human history, generated self-sustained secular growth in per capita income, not in income, in per capita income. Well, this is this very ambitious view resonates also with the institutionalist thought, for example, the regulation school in France, that unfortunately is not well known in the English-speaking world. In all that, technology and technical change is a necessary condition, but by no means a sufficient one. I mean, Dick was already underlying the interdisciplinary nature of the investigation required. In fact, innovation is not enough, for example, to explain the Industrial Revolution. Many of the innovations were not developed in Europe. They were developed in China, but China did not take off until recently. And this because of the mismatching with the other systems. The notion of national system of innovation and production is thus a fundamental part, but the theory is more general. What Klerkx proposes is basically an evolutionary theory of development nested in the couple dynamics between technology and the institution. And in that, knowledge accumulation, already Dick underlined it, knowledge accumulation plays a fundamental role. Knowledge that is both technological and organizational knowledge. It is absolutely clear how this relates to development theory. In fact, I mean, a stream that followed the inspiration of Dick, of the entire emerging evolutionary tradition is precisely understanding development as an evolutionary process driven by knowledge accumulation. Let me do some self-advertising and suggest the book edited by Mario Cimoli, myself, and Joe Stiglitz on industrial policy and development, in which one of the focuses is precisely the political economy of knowledge accumulation. Now, my feeling is that we did not proceed far enough in developing this view, this evolutionary view, this evolutionary view of development. My feeling is indeed that innovation studies over the last 25 years or so divorced the study of innovation from the broader study of economic evolution and development. This is also, I think, why we are most of our tradition turned out to be somewhat marginalized in providing an alternative, say, to the Washington consensus, and then nowadays to post-Washington view, whatever that is, because increasingly one has reduced the contribution of the seminal contribution of Chris, Dick, etc., to the study of the process of innovation. As important as it is to repeat, this is only part of an evolutionary story of growth and development. I don't see, I'm very worried about, in this respect, the fate of my alma mater, SPRU, because it is less and less acknowledging that this profound link between the innovation studies undertaken by the founding fathers and the broader growth and development issues. And you can see it. I mean, I want to be blunt. Look at research policy. Research policy is extremely successful in terms of citation, but tend to be polarized between empirical studies, generally of an econometric kind, of the kind that neither Chris nor Dick nor myself, for that matter, like very much, that is hypothesis testing and control for endogeneity, on the one side, or transition studies. Transition studies are at the opposite extreme. Transition studies are very much opposed to any disciplinary perspective, and to cite Hegel, are a bit, tend to be a bit the night in which all the cows are black. I mean, everything is related to everything else, everything is in transition. But one, from the opposite end, loses the richness of the contribution of the founding fathers. My feeling is that, I'm not very optimistic, my feeling is that we are seeing a sort of counter-reformation, in the sense that bits and pieces of the thought of the founding fathers are incorporated in the mainstream. And so, for example, you have new growth theory. New growth theory is a way of endogenizing, a way of acknowledging the fact that part of technological program is endogenous, part, while it says that all of it is endogenous, but then you squeeze it in a production function. That is, you make the acknowledgement of, in a sense, you expand the domain of optimal allocation of resources to innovation, while at least, say, Bongsolo was recognizing that, well, there is a very big residual out there, and this is the domain where I don't have anything to say with my production function, and I leave it to Nelson, Winter, etc., to explain what goes on in that residual. New growth theory, in a sense, is a counter-reformation in the sense that it's trying to squeeze back that residual with very often crazy assumptions within the production function itself. Or take from another end. I was
Giovanni, could I ask you to take 1 more minute?
okay.
Because we'll have no time for any questions.
Okay, I get to the end. Just emphasizing I can only end by emphasizing my worry and the wish to go back to Chris's thought and take his evolutionary institutionalist view of economic development seriously. And this I don't see very much happening. And I see that this is also behind the problem that crucial institutions like SPRU, but also UN Merit, are nowadays facing. I end there with not too much optimism.
Thank you very much. And to raise this question about how the insights and the richness of the innovation of the evolutionary approach is sort of, we say, incorporated in the mainstream and then lost and transformed in ways that we didn't intend. I had some questions that I'll just take it in order. We have only a few minutes, this question was directed to Francisco, but I think other people could maybe give their view on it if we want. They wanted to know what are the similarities and differences between innovation system and in the notion of an ecosystem, which is of course becoming an increasingly popular concept. And Francisco, do you have a view on that? And the second question, which I think we have time for, it was directed to Dick Nelson and Giovanni, which had to do with civically developing countries and what types, the question about what types of governments have been more successful in developing in the innovation system, authoritarian or democratically inclined, democratic types of government structures. Those two questions, I think any of the panelists could respond to, but let's start with Francisco because that question was directed towards him.
Well,
about the ecosystems versus innovation systems frameworks.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I don't have much to add to that question. It's an interesting analogy, although of course the ecosystems are studied by a specific science of complexity in natural systems, and we deal with a second level of complexity, which is not only the framework of multiple decisions, but the organization and the institutional framework in which they are developed, and which are some very important constraints. One of those is addressed by the national systems of innovation, which of course is also suggested that as a form of generating innovation, institutional innovation in itself. So in that sense, all that may be useful in order to have new ideas. So metaphors are very useful for that, but mostly for that.
Does anybody of the other panelists have a perspective on that, or should we go on to the next question, which was, and again, I think all of you could it was directed to Dick and Giovanni, but all may have view on this question of different forms of governance, which have been more or less successful in developing the innovation system, authoritarian versus what democratic. That could be an invitation to give your view about which and why.
Dick, do you want to begin?
Yes.
Dick?
Yeah, Dick, would you want to comment on that?
Well, in that case, I mean, waiting for Dick, let me give a very telegraphic answer. There is no straightforward answer to that question. in the sense that you've got example of democratic government fostering catching up, industrialization, and also authoritarian ones. I mean, in the second, think of the fantastic success of China. That is certainly not a democratic regime. I mean, I don't want to be the pessimist in every domain, but there is a stream of liberal thought that says, well, with capitalism comes democracy. That dates back to Max Weber, and unfortunately, this does not seem to be true. You can have a complex management of societies without having a democratic system as we know it. I would love to hear also what Francisco thinks about it.
Let's take a few more minutes then, Francisco and Dick. Do you want to comment on that?
I'll comment in an oblique way.
Okay.
And that I think there's a remarkably interesting difference between the way a quite powerful central government in China has aimed to encourage and spur the internal innovation process, and the way the Soviets did it half a century or a century earlier. And this is therefore not a commentary on how different totalitarian, whether comparison being a totalitarian and a more democratic regime, but rather in terms of the broad policy arenas. What I think was quite striking about the Soviet experience and its failure was that the policies strongly concentrated the innovation process in one or two key organizations and institutions. In some sense, they viewed the innovation process as one that was plannable and controllable in detail. And the experience clearly was very unfortunate in terms of getting the system to move progressively. What is interesting about the Chinese experience is, though, while you have a very centralized governmental structure, what the policy has been and what it has achieved is a considerable amount of variety and diversity in terms of the organizations that have been helped and encouraged to move forward in the innovation process. In some sense, what you've had is a centralized generation and spurring of a decentralized evolutionary process at the level of innovation. I think that's a fascinating difference. But essentially, you can have strong top government agencies, nonetheless, supporting a quite diversified and competitive range of research enterprises. I think the experience, for example, in American agriculture, to pick up what we talked about earlier in terms of agricultural innovation, is an interesting case in point.
Thanks, Dick. I see we could obviously go on all afternoon on these. We'll have to move on to the next hour session, and maybe these questions will reappear at the end of the next session. So we'll then move on to the policy and politics session with Franco speaking first. Franco, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. Well, great to see a lot of friends online, and I have not seen a lot of them for quite a long time. And I'm going to follow what the previous friends have said. Basically, the title of the session is Policy and Politics. And I want to go back to what Giovanni started with in his discussion. Basically, Chris really had a broad view of policy and politics within the evolution of economies. He has this great piece in Industrial and Corporate Change in 2019, where basically he identifies, as Giovanni said, 5 subsystems that interact, and policy and politics are key elements of this co-evolutionary process. But I want also to remember another great piece by Chris, the 1987 book, Technology, Policy and Economic Performance, Lesson from Japan, that strongly addressed the key role of policy in Japan in catching up in some sectors. And I think this is it's a masterful piece of how policy can affect economic development and catch up. So basically, Chris taught us the key relevance of policy within an innovation system. And in fact, public policy, and this is the Globelix also tradition, is central to an innovation system perspective on 2 grounds. One ground in terms of actors. There are the central government and the local governments, regional governments, and so on. And the other is the institutions. Institution in a sense, laws, regulations, and so on. And so in these 2 aspects, actors and then institutions, not non-actors, institutions, public policy and the government are key players. And another lesson that came out from Chris and the globalist tradition is that active government policy is fundamental for economic development. So active government policy is something that Chris advocated in all his life, as well as Benteke, Dick Nelson, and a lot of other friends. So basically, I want to start briefly from here in the few minutes I have, and start and thank Susan that really saved me time in discussing STI policies, sustainable development goals, policy designs. I didn't want to just briefly mention this, but I want to take stock of a big tradition of evolutionary studies, innovation system studies, all related to Globelix, and point out 3 broad lessons that we got from Chris and from the Globelix evolutionary and innovation system tradition. The first lesson in which we can take stock is policies intervenes because you don't have only market failures, but have learning and capability failures and system failure. And I think this is a strong legacy that comes from Chris. It comes also from Globelix. And where you, when you talk about learning and capability failures, you talk about difficulty in knowledge accumulation by companies, the role of human capital, the role of searching in uncertain environment. Basically, all these results and evidence that the evolutionary theory has pointed out in the last years. And with system failures, we add up all these system failure. They may take place at the system level when an actor doesn't have enough capabilities, links and connections may not be strong, or mismatches are missing between parts of the system. So this is the first point that I want to make. The second point is that if you have an evolutionary and system perspective, and this is also from Chris' legacy, you need systems of policy. I think this is a very strong point that came up from our general group. System of policies means that you cannot just point out and address one single policy as solving some problem, learning and capability failure or system failure, but you need a set of policies that may address the learning and capability, the development of infrastructure, the entry of new actors, but basically they have to be coordinated and integrated. And I think one of the most interesting result from, again, the Globelix and the evolutionary and system tradition is that complementarities in policies are very important. I mean, complementarities among both different type of policies and also different type of impacts that policies have on different parts of the system. And related to that, when you take into account the system of policies and system in general, you may pointed out that policies need to be tuned to the specificity of national system and sectoral system. You know, I like general models, I like big generalizations, but I think that the tradition of Globelix, as well as the tradition of evolutionary economics, as well as national system and sectoral systems, points out that the specificities in which policies intervene in terms of countries or in terms of sectors are tremendously different. And policies have to take into account that we have a big tradition of evidence, but of course, if you have policies for green sectors, they are different from policies for ICT or policy for agriculture. And again, you know, the policymakers and our tradition have to point it out that generalization is important, but also paying account to the context, the national and sectoral context in which policies intervene is very important. We have, for example, in ICC, just a couple of new special issues on which we discuss green policies in the green sector and another in artificial intelligence. And you understand, and you see that the type of policies and the type of complementarities that these policies act upon are very, very different. And let me come to the last point, of my short remarks. So, and this is probably the most, I think, novel, as well as I think open to progress. The methodology for policy analysis. The methodology of policy analysis. We have an enormous evidence-based analysis of a lot of cases, and I think again the SPRU tradition, the Globalist tradition are so rich of very interesting cases of policies in countries and in sectors. And we have also quantitative analysis. We have, you know, data now available not only through quantitative databases on R&D and patents, but we have also the CIS that provides us qualitative data on a large scale. again, so we have an enormous evidence base that needs to be still developed even more. We have also good appreciative theorizing from this evidence-based analysis of cases and quantitative analysis. What I think is going on now is to develop empirically grounded micro-modeling of, for example, the agent-based models, or as you know, I'm fond of history-friendly models, and history-friendly models are tuned to specific sectors, even to specific countries, and so on, because they take into account the specificities of the context. Now, why I'm mentioning empirically grounded micro-modeling? Because it allows, these models allow to, in a sense, do policy analysis and do counterfactuals based on a specific context and not just in general terms. So basically, let me conclude by saying this legacy from Chris to consider failures not only in terms of market failures, but also and particularly in terms of learning and capability failures and system failures. Considering policy in terms of system of policies that have to be tuned to the specificities of the national or the sectoral context in which they apply to. And also this idea of a methodology that combines evidence-based and empirical analysis, appreciative theorizing, and also empirically grounded micro-modeling, I think are very strong legacies, Chris, that also I think is a big legacy also from the globalist community and from the evolutionary in a system and innovation system community. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your discussion here about policies. And we're going to just go right ahead because we're a little bit behind. So Lorenz, I will pass the, what shall I say, the Zoom to you.
Thank you very much, Edward. I will share my screen. I made a couple of slides to support my presentation. Let's go to, where is it? Full screen mode. Can you see this? I guess you can. So some brief reflections, and you will see towards the end that they also have to do with policy and politics. And this is about how innovation systems thinking has entered agriculture and how we also have used this concept in the agricultural sector. Obviously, the agricultural sector has also been studied from what you could call mainstream innovation studies or generic innovation studies with a focus on different sectors. The work of Keith Pavitt, supplier-dominated industry. But as you will see in my presentation, we have taken innovation concepts in our own way. So where have we come from? Originally in agriculture, it had a linear adoption and diffusion model. Rogers' model was very strong. Also was very useful to explain some dynamics, but wasn't useful to explain other dynamics, and also to capture the diversity of producer, the diversity of farming strategies, etc. So already within the agricultural sector, critiques emerged in the 80s towards this model, but you could see that kind of a own type of systems thinking developed from within the agricultural sector. And that is that concept of agricultural knowledge and information systems. Some people from my department, Niels Reuling, Paul Engel, they developed this concept. It was very much aimed at interactive learning, feedback loops between all kinds of players in the agricultural system, but it hardly engaged with mainstream innovation thinking coming from groups like SPRU. That changed towards the 90s, and it was also due to one of the SPRU alumni, Andy Hall, who brought this to the agricultural sector, and you saw kind of a merger of this AKIS thinking with agricultural innovation systems thinking, AIS thinking, in the first decade of the millennium. also, enriching the way we approach this innovation, systemic thinking. But until the end of the 90s, it really developed more or less in isolation, at least looking at it really from within the agricultural sector, because obviously generic innovation system scholars have looked at agriculture. And what you see now as a latest trend, and I heard Giovanni about it, has sustainability transition has also become very strongly rooted in thinking about innovation in agriculture, also in view of all the tremendous problems agriculture has caused. So what you can see is that in the agricultural studies, we've had a rather loose, some would call it sloppy, others would call it pragmatic engagement with innovation systems perspective. So if you look at the studies in agriculture using innovation systems, theories and frameworks, they have conceptualized AAS at a national level, looking at, how does a country support its agricultural sector in terms of innovation, but also as sectors within countries or across sectors, within regions, taking cluster approaches, also global value chain analysis, global value chains, because many of the agri-food players are very big multinational companies, but also as a technological system. So looking at, for example, a seed innovation and approaching that as a technological system. So if you look at this literature in agriculture, it is very diverse in how it draws the boundaries of innovation systems. So also what is maybe quite typical from the agricultural sector and how we have engaged with innovation systems perspective is that we have used it very much as an intervention tool as well, to proactively foster co-evolution and innovation. So we have really used it to enhance systemic thinking in the sector. And this is not atypical from, I call it mainstream innovation studies and non-agricultural, because you also have a rapid appraisal of local innovation systems, for example, by Sean Cunningham. But we developed these kinds of tools, rapid appraisal of agricultural innovation systems. So we use these perspectives a lot as diagnostic tools, also using the system failure frameworks, capability failures, directionality failures, actor failures, interaction failures. And we also have used it to inform systemic interventions like innovation platforms, intermediaries. So you see quite a pragmatic use of this approach in the agricultural sector. So what is kind of the latest trend? What is the latest thinking? And this is also not disconnected from non-agricultural innovation systems and transition thinking, is that we also, as Susan Cozzens has also remarked, we have become much more aware of directionality, power, so the normative dimension. So it's not just like agricultural innovation system, they produce good innovations. Now they also produce problems. Sometimes we need to phase out certain parts of the system. We need to phase out certain technologies. So you see a much stronger engagement with concepts from, for example, transition thinking. Here's the paper by Johan Schott and Ed Steinmuller. And this is also because the agricultural sector, like other sectors, is in a very dynamic setting now with all kinds of emerging technologies which are dramatically affecting the sector and also will lead to dramatically different sorts of farmers. So what we are now very much concerned about is how can agricultural innovation systems capture these different kinds of farmers and have just and inclusive pathways for all these types of farmers. There's no one model. It's also about catering for different models. So you have a robotic farmer, a cyborg farmer, you have an agroecological farmer, you have a cellular farmer. And there's a lot of dynamics, and that awareness has really entered the scene of agricultural innovation systems thinking. So we have also lately engaged with this idea of mission orientation, which obviously has a comeback in innovation systems thinking, also through Mariana Mazzucato. And what we are now very much looking at is what kinds of missions are playing out in the agricultural sector, and how do the innovation systems engage with it at the country level, at the sector level. But obviously there's lots of cross-cutting dynamics here. These boundaries are not really clear-cut, because also these technologies are not really clear-cut. In protein transition, circular food systems, digital agriculture, You see a lot of mixing between sectors. You see a lot of new players coming in, which traditionally were not interested in agriculture. And you see a lot of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs entering this sector. There's a huge boom in investments, in venture capital, because agriculture is really seen as like the next hot thing, whereas previously I think it was seen as kind of a backward sector, which was not really interesting, maybe for land investments, but not for technology investments. So what we are now at with our analysis is also that we try to understand much better how is this diversity of missions panning out. What is out there, and also how do innovation systems contemplate that? Do they still promote only one sort of agriculture and ignore others? This is also the power dimension. Or are they open to stimulating different sorts of future food systems? So that is basically where we are at now. And yeah, I hope this also provides some interesting food for thought, because obviously this is also playing out in other sectors, in energy transitions, in logistics transitions, that you also see this convergence and this cross-sector interaction. Okay, this was it. Thank you very much. I will now stop sharing, and I look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And you actually you used less time than you had, so we're a little bit free in terms of having a bit more discussion later. Come back to some issues, some questions that were raised about your presentation.
Yeah, thanks.
The next speaker is Francis, and I'll pass it on to you. Are you there?
Thank you. I'm here. So good afternoon, colleagues. And I think it's a good thing that I was coming immediately after Lorenz, because you might notice that we are close. My presentation is a little bit different, because what we were trying to do was to embed the whole innovation systems thinking into the research community in African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. So I'm just sharing some quick experience and lessons learned. We worked with Union Intech, Banjir Yinka, and Lynn Maitelka, because the concept is so complex that we needed to get the buy-in from the leaders, the directors of the agricultural research institutes, the deans and principals of agricultural universities, and it was all within the framework of shaping science, technology, and innovation policies to address development issues through agriculture. So I'm clear. No problems with the mic. Good. Yeah. So this diagram helped to cement some of the issues that we are discussing. And one of the things that I was very happy about the previous discussion, showing that a range of policies interact to shape the innovation habits and behaviors of the main actors. So we wanted to understand what works, does not work. We wanted to be able to help shape policy, science and innovation policy, R&D, agriculture, influence underinvestment in science and innovation, in research and development. Governments were promoting increasing investments to like 1% of GDP, etc. And we also wanted to work with within the active framework to improve processes, build capacity for continuous innovation. And I think that this is one of the whole driving or the drivers behind the work we do in terms of trying to analyze the innovation system, and also to understand how learning is taking place, how knowledge is being generated, etc. What were some of the challenges we had in terms of the conceptual differences? And they keep coming out. They keep coming out in our discussions. Hello?
Could you please all mute and while the speaker is talking? Thank you.
Yeah, and this is what these are some of the issues that came out in our discussions as we took it at the highest level, and then we went to the ground. So the issue of what is innovation, the different types of innovation, how do they impact on what we're doing? And I think that these are some of the issues that still come out in the discussions. Lorenz talked about systems versus systemic, the need for systemic innovation, the organizations and institutions, etc. So what we did is we actually came up with what you call a glossary of terms to guide our intervention programs on building capacity, not only on understanding the innovation systems, but actually applying it in the agricultural sector. What were some of the other issues? Lorenz mentioned platforms. So we did also support the creation of some innovation platforms, and these were studied at different levels and processes and well documented. But what we also consider as important is that in building capacity for innovation within our research and development, agricultural research and development, science and innovation community, we also needed to make sure that there was an issue of how do you address uncertainty. So can you predict how this technology will evolve, what kind of impact it would have, who are the stakeholders you need to collaborate with. Other issues that came out, and I'm saying that these are missed opportunities for wider adoption of the concept within the agricultural transformation agenda, the inability to articulate the bigger picture. So why how is this understanding innovation processes relevant to my economic development, my social development? Does it take into consideration the cultural aspects within which issues are free? And then another problem that we have is to not work outside our ISA bubble. So we tend to stick among ourselves, talk among ourselves, we argue among ourselves. We've had experiences where as soon as we bring the experts together and we say, well, okay, we want the policymakers on board because they need to understand what we are doing, the implications to them, etc. Then the policymakers decide, no, this is too complex, they withdraw, and then they don't participate anymore. But beyond that, we also need to be able to engage. The way forward, recalibrating. And again, we still have to look at the conceptual and methodological differences. In our case, we adopted a case study approach. We use some of the tools that Lorenz mentioned. We look at the way how policies evolved over time, what were the impacts and all these issues. But, and that's why I was very happy, and I forgot to say thank you to Rajesh for the invitation, that we need to promote greater transparency and a willingness to listen. So when we are within our bubble, we talk and we are very happy. But from the time we have to present this framework outside of the innovation systems. Think as if you think, for example, in our challenging circumstances with the R&D, agricultural R&D community, the deans, the vice chancellors, we had to be able to listen to some of them were skeptical, and then we also had to take into consideration their opinion. We need to embed it in the broader development context, and we've been talking about it. We need to be inclusive. We need to build capacity across domains. So it's not only the economic theory of innovation, but what are the lessons that we are taking out of applying it in other sectors, agriculture, health, etc. The tools, when we started our first test case, we had to revise it, the methodology and the tools, and then it kept evolving. We also needed to consider the cost. Edward, I'm almost finished. This is the last point. And we need to be willing to deliberate on the findings of all these studies, etc., with partners. We do reliance on publications. And why I'm emphasizing this, I still find it difficult after all these years of work to enter into international policy dialogues and still finding that we have not got through to people in terms of what we mean by innovation systems concept. So I just listed some selected bibliography that is not exhaustive, but some of the things that have been, and it's wide depth. We have published a lot, we learn from each other, etc. And this is the last publication that we had put out in collaboration with Wageningen University COS-SIS program. So in that, you will find all the deliberations that we had on the concepts, the methodologies, etc., etc. And thank you very much. Sorry to be so quick, but that's it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you very much, Judith. Yes, you kept within the time limit, and we'll be able to come back with some questions that have been addressed to you and to Lorenz on agricultural issues and innovation systems. So that'll be at the end, following Michiko's presentation. Okay. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. We're going to have some questions that will come back. Okay, after Michiko.
And so, can I speak now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much all, and I think it's a great honor to be speaking in this panel, and I really thank Rajesh in organizing this wonderful course, which unfortunately I must say that due to the time differences, I wasn't able to attend until the last seminar and the panel, and which I thoroughly enjoyed in a conversation like this. As Lorenz was saying, and as other people are saying, we have been missing this for such a long time during the COVID. So I thank all for this. This is also a great opportunity to sort of look back at the contribution of the Professor Freeman. I think many of the issues that we are now undergoing because of the COVID has a lot of implication to what he has said, which is the importance of science and the importance of a kind of change that is causing not only the technological, but also institutional. And the institutional change, because of the COVID, the acceleration of the change is also taking place, as other people had mentioned. I actually didn't prepare the very nice slide as other people had done. I did just one, and I'll show you a little later. And in the kind of preparation to this panel, I have given several questions. And what I have done is to sort of look at the question and try to answer the question. And one of the question, or the two of the first question that I find it very interesting was the configuration, the sectorial boundary, how the sectorial boundary change with the introduction or emergence of enabling technologies. I tried to answer that in my presentation, and I'm going to share the slide that I made. I don't know whether you see this now. Do you see this? Do I have to enlarge it a little bit? What I tried to do is that they are asking about emerging enabling technologies. And I thought that it would be important to know what we are talking about. We are talking about emerging technology, and what addresses as an emerging technology is a radical technology in itself. And the impact it has is uncertain. As Francis talked about, there is an uncertainty in what the technology may serve to. And the observed change is relatively fast because the technology itself is growing. And complementarity, as the Professor Malerba was talking about, which is quite important because that actually try to build, explore the method of use. And enabling technology is a little bit different from emerging technology because it's drive radical change in the use of technology because it's enabling you to do some other things. So it means that applicability of the diverse field is what is causing as an impact. And the rapid development of subsequent technology is an observed change. Therefore, complementary is now a kind of expanding. And if it moves to general purpose technology, then it would kind of transform the society. So I think that there's a gradual change. And the gradual change, why I am talking about this kind of, these three technology in a different way, is because that in a process of transformation, the sector is going to reconfigure because each technology is going to interact with relevant actors and try to make a network, and that would try to confirm the kind of boundary of the sector. So I think this would probably explain how the boundary is now changing, and who are the actor of changes. And that also gives a little bit of concern and hope in a way. The hope is that many countries would be able to be in a place to be a part of this change, because it's a new process, and especially in the developing country where the strong incumbent is not present, you would have a much freedom to develop. However, there is also a downside, which is that, as many people had mentioned, capability, access. If these are not present, then the taking advantage of that available information, I mean, especially the digital technology makes that quite obvious. Those people who have a capability and access would gain, and those people who do not have access would lose out immensely. And how to correct that is going to be a huge issue. And I don't think we have an answer to it. And suddenly it is not the type of question that one country or especially that global south can answer. It should be in collaboration with global north. But how to do it is still a missing point in the policy. And also another very difficult challenge that the digital technology and AI is posing is what Susan had mentioned, which is a multinational corporation that act beyond borders. So when we talk about policy, now we are coming to the policy, the national boundary, you can have a regulation, you can have an institution, but they are beyond this border. So how to control that is going to be a challenge. And whether the regulation, like a rule of law, can become an answer to it is a question. And what I see though is the soft law, like guidelines or the agreement, like SDG, is one of the answers. It's kind of show the directionality, that's what's also mentioned, of where we should be going. And then each individual sort of guidelines with the sector. So there is also an environmental one, and there is also social one. And these are also, this would require another thing, which is the civil society, how we are going to use these guidelines and how we are going to sort of orient the big giants into the orientation and directionality we want. And we yet to see that in place, but I see some signs of some of the kind of signals. Well, I don't have a figure here, but in Japan, or in perhaps many countries, we have seen a lot of social entrepreneurs emerging. And this is a good sign because they are trying to do social goods with as well as economic goods. They're trying to kind of balance it itself. Another thing is that I see this regulatory sandbox or open innovation, which is a little bit more participatory, because the regulatory institution cannot control everything and they cannot know everything because it's uncertain. And then the technology progresses in such a rapid way. So it has to be experimented and then evaluated and then come back and then try an error approach. So, but these instruments are now becoming to be more and more popular. Another is the partnership with the private sector, like the contract method, like pay for success, which is hiring the services by the government with the private sector. But then they would be paid with a social impact, and there is a calculation for that. So it's not only so that they are asked to do some social impact. Other thing is the corporate social responsibility. Now we are now seeing that the people talking, I think Business Council talking about stakeholders and shareholders. We also see the financial institutions that are appearing, the crowdfunding, impact fund, ESG investment. These financial sources would also be able to be a forces in guiding the large corporate into better or the desirable pathways. So so these are sort of like a possible policy tool that we see as a hope. But these pieces has to be kind of configured into new form so that what we emerging to achieve in 2030 in SDG could actually be possible. But I haven't really, the question to the audience perhaps is that what could be done? I mean, in the more concrete and empirical sense. These are the tools, but how to implement it. So this is all for my presentation. I hope I kept in time, or maybe too short.
No, it's perfect.
Okay.
Can
Thank you very much.
Close your screen.
Oh yes. Stop share.
Well, look, we have some time for questions, and there's 3 questions. One which actually goes back to a question I think that was posed to Susan, and then Michiko could perhaps also respond to. On agriculture, question was raised: should we be talking about agro-industry innovation systems as opposed to agricultural innovation systems? That was one point. At least that's how I interpreted the question. And related to that, how effective a tool for policy development at the national level can the AIS concept be if it's only specific to agriculture? So I think those questions sort of say, do we need to interlink industry and agriculture in the same framework? So I'll let first Lorenz respond to that, and then Judith.
Well, I think that this idea of the connection with industry is already contemplated, because AIS, it contemplates the full chain from production till processing, and now with a food system perspective, also consumption, recycling. So it is already very much focused at the whole complex of foods, fiber, whatever you make from agricultural products industries. And from other fields, for example, political economy, there's also a lot of analysis taking this as a global system, looking at the flow, the power, looking also at basically where the innovative capacity is, how it flows to subsidiaries. So I think that is very well contemplated already. Obviously, some of the studies will zoom in on a particular part of it. They will not take the whole complex, but they're definitely there. And with regards to the usefulness for policy making, yeah, obviously, you can say for all sectors that they can be too inward looking with their policies. And I think also any good advice will also contemplate what is the connection with other sectors, and perhaps also breaking these sectoral boundaries. I'm not sure whether that happens in all countries, because sometimes it's very much rooted within ministries of agriculture and they sometimes do not look outside. But if you look at some other countries, they have clearly made the connection with the ICT sectors. They've made clearly the connection also with the energy sectors, particularly because agriculture explicitly is seen as a part of those new emerging industries, and they're also feeding into new sorts of food systems. So I see increasingly that this is being opened up also in policy making.
Thank you. Judith, do you want to speak to those?
Yes.
As well?
Yes, because ours was embedded in the wider system. We wanted to make sure that I think what we realized is that agriculture itself was closed. Agriculture needed to open up. Science and technology policy was closed, and it wasn't open. Education wasn't open. So when we took the systems approach, what we were able to do, and it was a lot of work, and I'm saying that all of us still have work to do. We got people to realize that this is embedded in a wider system. Things impact on agriculture which are outside of the domain of the agriculture vis-a-vis experts, and also the international system. Right, your networks also impact. So for us, bringing the innovation systems approach to agriculture meant that it opened up the space, the policy space, the learning space for but a lot of work still to do.
Thank you. That makes sense. Yeah, I can. And both of the responses were directly to the point, and when you look at a value chain, you're looking at production as well, and industrial production as well as agricultural production, obviously. Let's go on. The next question is, I'm just going directly on because I don't have much time. It was directed to Franco, but Michiko may have some thoughts about it. And it refers to the fact we're talking now about the digital transformation, digital learning. And the question has, said in Africa, this has become a very key policy issue, especially with the AU's digital transformation strategy 2020-30. So the question was, should digital learning and policies for enhancing it, should they be, are they best directed to the sectoral level, the regional level, the national level? That was the question.
Well, let me just take the liberty of answering our chairman by answering very shortly on this question, very few seconds, and then make one comment in general. This digital learning is, if you understand digital learning as a learning mechanism, this is not absolutely a sectoral system, or it's kind of general purpose learning. It's different if you want to study or understand the ICT as a sector, which is different. So I think it depends. If you look at learning is pervasive. Let me just make two comments. One on agriculture. I think that the great presentation of Lorenz and Judith point to the agricultural sectoral system is so specific and so interesting as a sectoral system that, of course, has some global boundaries in certain aspects, national boundaries in others, but the sectoral system itself has not been, it should be the focus of attention of, I think, fascinating studies. And the second point, very shortly, about ecosystem. I saw somebody said, what's the difference between ecosystem and innovation system? Let me just point out, and this is something that I really wanted to make in my presentation. I find the discussion of ecosystem so general, so vague. We all live in an ecosystem, you know, and whatever. And the national system, regional system, sectoral system are much more focused. One way to understand the ecosystem is what management studies did, and they are more, I think, clearly defined in terms of ecosystem. The management literature says ecosystem is a company with suppliers, users, and complementors. So in a sense, focused on the firm and the supplier firms, the user firms or the consumers, and the complementors. No discussion of institutions, no discussion of policies, no, which I think is a finer and more focused way. But there is a major difference between ecosystem in general and national, sectoral, or regional systems that are much more focused on institutions as well as firms. That's just, I wanted to make a comment.
Thanks, because actually that was an issue that was raised as well.
Yes, I noticed a major difference.
Let me, we have a few more minutes. Let me just turn to the question that, well, in a way, since it's a question that Michiko asked Susan, I think you could both give your views on it. And it had to do with how can we control the big platforms, Google, Amazon, Facebook. If these are causing inequality and these people are becoming exceedingly rich and have too much power, what needs to be done to rein in the big digital players? Susan, do you want to say something about that?
Sure. I won't confine myself to just the digital players because we've got the multinational corporations. I think they are actually central to change in the system, and the places that are going to put pressure on them to think about sharing growth across the global system are actually coming from outside government. I think that public pressure through things like ESG investing that Michiko mentioned, sort of general public profile of big corporations is going to shake loose change within the corporations, which actually requires a little legal change in some places. And then that will feed back into government. I don't think government is strong enough anywhere to take on those corporations.
Thank you. That's worrisome, but sounds right. Michiko, do you want to say anything about that? Or about the question of digital learning skills in relationship to technologies?
I would say something about this big giant. I happen to know a person in Japan who tried to tackle with this issue, and it is very difficult. But then I also heard that they are also concerned, that the big company themselves are concerned about how they are portrayed by the public. So I think it goes in two ways. At the same time, also the financial sources, how the financial sources and how the investor would invest, and how we react to the consumer. So, I mean, it's down to a different type of capability. I mean, we haven't really talked about individual capability of consumption, and this would probably may become quite an important element that each individual has to be aware of these issues and then take an action in expressing how we should spend, how we should purchase, and how we behave in the daily lives. And then these should align. I mean, the small instruments that are appearing should align at some point to make it a little bit more real. But yes, I do agree with Susan that it is beyond the government.
The government's at the stage. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you then for that lively discussion. And we're now exactly on time. We have 10 minutes, a break, pause. And also there will be Rajesh, as he mentioned, bringing up some Well, you'll just take it over, Resh, yes. And people can also go fill up their coffee cup. And we'll be back for the third panel in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Why it is not sharing? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. We both of us, myself and Veronica, we will try to complete this in 10 minutes. So this is a report based on an online survey that we have conducted, but which is still underway. We received only 67 responses so far. Hence, this is an interim report. Innovation Systems 101 is the first in the Chris Freeman Centenary lecture series, started on 7th January and ends today. In 12 lectures and 2 panels, we featured 19 speakers, 15 chairs, and 24 panelists, attended by on an average 80 to 100 participants, both on Zoom and YT Live. Out of the 67 respondents, 24% belong to Africa, 21% each from Asia and South America, 19% from Europe, and 15% from North and Central Americas. 48% from high and upper middle income countries, 31% from lower middle income countries, and 10% from LICs. Profession-wise, 39% professors, university professors, 27% researchers, and 22% PhD students. 95.5% have either economics or social sciences as background. 12% natural sciences, 6% engineering, and 12% from other applied sciences. So that means 30% of the respondents are interdisciplinarians, implying that the interdisciplinary movement pioneered by Chris is doing quite well. 33% are female, 45% belong to the age group of 31 to 40, and 28% above 51 years. 37% active researchers, 25% early career researchers, and 9% senior scholars. There is, of course, some overlap in these categories. Participation from policy sphere is comparatively low at 7.5%, from which I think the community needs to take a cue. We need to bring in more policymakers to the fora. More than half the respondents belong to the GlobalX network. 21% belong to AfricaLix, 12% from LALix. We have 13% of respondents who have membership in Schumpeter Society. I think the various leagues have opportunity for expanding their network, because 25% of the participants do not belong to any network. That's an opportunity. 87% have used national systems of innovation concept in their research. Some see it either as an appropriate policy tool or as a key to the evolution of their own national economies. Some appreciate its combining ability with participatory action research. Some doubt the degree of freedom of the concept, questioning its own scope. Some feel that more indicators related to DUI model are required. Some doubt NSI's applicability in the global south. We try to understand what is the need, or what does the IS community need, or what GlobalX could do about it. 91% of the respondents need opportunity to listen to senior scholars. 85% need massive open online courses. 61% awareness creation among undergraduates. 42% need mentoring opportunities. 52% feel a paucity of PhD opportunities are scarce. While appreciating this data, let's keep in mind that the survey is still incomplete. And what we hear are predominantly voices from high and upper middle income countries to the tune of 58%. representation of LICs in the survey is just 10%. Thus, the survey has to proceed further to reveal more truth. Almost all variables associated with qualitative performance of the program, such as syllabus, course material, theory, speakers' knowledge, etc., were graded good or very good by more than 90% of respondents. There's a strong recommendation to publish the series as an edited volume or textbook. There are a few autobiographical lectures, virtual fellowships, a mentoring series for PhDs, etc. I assure you that we will consider these recommendations. 21% of the respondents felt that coverage of the applied aspect is poor. Therefore, we announce our next series, Innovation Systems 102, on practical applications of innovation systems. Please watch out for the call for purpose. Thanks very much. Now I pass the forum over to Dr. Veronica Robert to propose vote of thanks. Veronica, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Rajesh. With this last meeting, the Christopher Freeman lectures come to the end. It has been a wonderful experience that has been sustained for 3 months with weekly meetings and an average of participation of around 80 people in each meeting. It has been an example of what our community can give, even in this adverse context of a pandemic that we are going through right now. As a product of a collective work, Christopher Freeman lectures would not have been possible without the support of all of you. And with this brief word, we would like to thank all of the participants in this series. First, we would like to thank to all the attendees of this series for whom this activity was planned, young researchers and students from all over the world, and especially from Global South, because we know that particularly in your case, it's not easy to participate in international events. We also know that despite strong and sustained growth in the literature and the literature of innovation system, still occupies a marginal role in most of the undergraduate and graduated programs in economics and related activities around the world. So we would therefore like to thank all of you young researchers who first approached the literature of innovation system and Chris Freeman work. We hope that we have conveyed our admiration, respect, and from those who knew him also their affection. And in doing so, many of you have been motivated to read Freeman's work now. Also, we would like to thank to the lecturers of the series, to all the 11 researchers that have prepared their lecture with great commitment. The entire team, the entire team also have mobilized to spread the series among their students and collaborate in every section. Special thanks goes to Nandita Matthews, who also with the UNU merit facilitate the use of the Zoom platform through which the meetings were held. And also especially thanks goes to Hannah Schmutzler and Andrew Cummins, who helped us in several ways. We would like to thank to the senior scholars for showing us and giving us their full support for the realization of this lecture series. Your participation has been invaluable. The generosity of the senior scholars toward the young students in these communities is extraordinary and is rarely seen in academic circles. So thanks goes to all of them. To those who comment each lectures, your contribution has been extremely enriching. You have been able to extend and illuminate the presentation of the younger researchers with respect and affection. You have also maintained an extremely active participation in all of the discussion. Among all of them, we would like to thank especially to Dick Nelson, Rasigan Maraha, Judith Sutz, Mamo Mucci, Elena Lastres, Susan Cozzens, Xiaolan Fu, Manuel Godinho, Gabriel Joguel, Gabriela Dutrenit, Keisei Joseph, Michiko, Iizuka, Lena Trocher, Giovanni Dosi, Rebecca Hanglin, Edward Lorenz, Kyun Lee, Judith Francis, Marina Sapiro, Smita Riva, Brita Dishamet, Franco Malerba, Chad Edquist, Francisco Louça, among many, many others. So, and a special thanks should go to Carlota Perez, Luxoed, Alan Freeman, and very especially to Ben Og Lundvall, who has supported us in this enterprise with special care and love. So thank you very, very much. Finally, we would like to thanks to 3 people who, without their participation, the series would not be happening what it was. First, a special thanks goes to our dear friend Rajesh. Everybody knows that he has been the main architect of all Freeman lectures. He has shown in organizing this activity a great entrepreneurial capacity. It must be said that this activity that today concludes with great success had a very humble beginnings without any resources at all, only the will to work. So thank you very much, Rajesh. Second, we would like to say thanks to Dr. Santosh Kumar Gr, the artist who made the wonderful posters that goes along with the series. The quality of his work is amazing, incredible. We all enjoy and look forward for each new poster. The art is part of our life, and when it approaches to our daily activities in such unexpected way like this, and it also is done with selfness and generosity, is simply wonderful. So thank you very much, Santosh, for that. And third, last but not least, to Mrs. Indu S, who has taken care of all technical details from the website, which is also amazing, and the YouTube live broadcasting. She was in every session, making sure that everything works perfectly, and it did. So Indu, without your support and help, we wouldn't be able to manage all technical aspects of this series. So to you, thank you very much. And I think perhaps we can call to Indu and Santosh to say hello to all of us.
Hello, thank you so much for those kind words. I'm overwhelmed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Dr. Santosh,
Dr. Santosh,
are you here?
We will.
I'm afraid, yes.
We need to move on, and we'll be able to come back to have some more discussion around the whole series at the end, I believe. Okay. So here is Charles Edquist, and the broad theme here is New Horizons for Innovation Systems, the Innovation Systems approach. Charles, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks.
And I'm very happy to be here, and I look forward to say a few things about how I believe that the systems of innovations approach can be used and developed. And all of this will be quite telegraphic because of the format of the whole thing. But before starting this, I want to share with you one of my early memories of Chris. I invited him to Linköping and for dinner at my house. But when we were going to eat, he had just disappeared. And after some searching, we found him lying on the floor in my children's room, building a Lego castle. I think it says some things about Chris' personality. The systems of innovation approach was an enormous leap forward for innovation studies. Chris Freeman, Bengt-Åke Lundvall, Dick Nelson, and others should have enormous credit for starting this development. And one of the main achievements of the development of the systems approach was that the previously dominant linear view on innovation and innovation policy has been completely replaced in innovation research. However, it has not been replaced in innovation policy, where the linear model is still dominating. I think we have learned enormously much about innovation processes during the last 4 or 5 decades. And Chris was very important as an initiator of this process. But now there are thousands of us that have contributed and that can contribute to this development, empirically, theoretically, and politically. But it's also a fact that we have also realized that even more remains to be done. Innovation studies is still in an early development phase. And before we can make innovation and innovation policy become an efficient tool to improve the world around us, we have to continue working very hard. In the few minutes I have here, I will mention a few conceptual and theoretical issues related to innovation processes. And this is not, of course, to neglect the importance of empirical work in the field. When I wrote about systems of innovation in the 1990s, I was very reluctant to call systems of innovation a formal theory. I argued that it was not mature enough to be given such a status. And therefore, I prefer to call it an approach or a conceptual framework. And many of us are very happy with this, to have a rather loose framework or approach when we deal with innovation and innovation policy. A common argument is that the phenomenon of innovation is much too complex to be captured by a theory in causal terms. The argument is that it is impossible to develop a theory of innovation. And I completely disagree to this. I have changed my mind, and I now argue that we must have the ambition to causally explain innovation. We must strive for developing a theory of innovation. We must identify the causes of innovation processes. That is what determines their development. And I will present just 2 arguments for this. The first one is that we have no chance whatsoever to understand the development of innovation processes if we do not have the ambition to understand their causes or determinants. And the same is true. The second argument is that that it is also true for firm innovation strategies and public innovation policies. If we do not have some knowledge about the most important causes of innovation processes, the decisions about innovation policies do not have a factual basis. They are not evidence-based. And they run the risk of being misused very much. And we are then unable to identify which innovation policy instruments that we shall use if we don't know the causes or determinants of innovation, at least the most important ones. I believe that those who want to should make collective and individual efforts to develop a causally based theory of innovation. In doing so, we should build upon the different existing versions of systems of innovation, and we should develop this into a sort of a unified theory of innovation. I realize that causal explanation in the social sciences is a very tricky and difficult thing, but the arguments I just mentioned are arguments for that we have to try to do this and hope to succeed. One crucial issue is that we include, as I see it, all determinants of innovation when we try to explain them. And this is what Susanna Boras and me have been trying to do in our recent book, which is actually called Holistic Innovation Policy. And yeah, you see it upside down, or well, here it is anyway. It's called Holistic Innovation Policy. And it deals with the theoretical foundations, the policy problems, and the instrument causes. And together with Mart Latzik, I am now working on developing this further. The final thing I want to say is that when we try to develop a theory of innovation, I argue that we also must make a clear distinction between innovation and research. They are not the same thing. Neither is innovation policy and research policy. They are not the same thing, but they are often treated together. For example, most of us are using the expression science, technology, and innovation policy, quote unquote. And this has a lot of problems, which I don't have time to go into, but the distinction between research and innovation is absolutely crucial. And if we don't do that distinction, we are actually falling back into the linear model, because we treat research as a very important, or even the most important determinant of innovations, which is not true in my view. There are many determinants of innovation. I will conclude by saying that I'm quite pessimistic about the world situation, the development of the situation in the world in various parts and countries. And I therefore want to finally point to the importance that Chris Freeman wrote something about hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles, for this broad discussion about innovation systems and the question of what is theory and how we should get a theory. But we can maybe come back to this question of causality in the discussion. So now Srinivas will be the next speaker, and I pass it on to you. Are you unmuted?
Can you see the screen?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Can you the presentation mode, Smita?
I don't know if you can increase the size.
Yeah. Is this good?
Better.
All right. So I'm just going to jump in. I'm still dreaming of a world where I do webinars in the mornings and everybody is on the other side of the clock. I can only imagine what Michiko is going through. I'm going to speed up a little bit and keep everyone awake. So first of all, thank you incredibly for the generosity of the invitation. And I want to say generosity because although I didn't have the privilege of meeting or working with Chris Freeman, what has come across so clearly in so many different ways of the forces he set in motion, if you like, were that people in the extended community working on innovation have been incredibly generous. And I have found that they all refer back to his generosity in many ways. And I can only assume, therefore, that it spills over in multiple ways down the generations. So thank you. I want to build on this thread a little bit about how we can take the very important work that Chris Freeman and so many colleagues here have spent their careers developing and pick one or two strands that from my perspective, from where I come from and how I have developed my work, might give us a little flavor of where the opportunities lie. In particular, I am very optimistic about the usability of some of the ideas and the frameworks, whether they are theories, we can debate, but they have great resonance and they do generate a great deal of interest in both policy circles and therefore another way of coming back to appreciative theorizing, a term that Dick and others certainly may be much more aware of. Now, when I was a long time ago in the land of the dinosaurs, when I was at MIT doing my PhD, one of the things that was brought very clearly home to me was great epistemic challenges between different evolutionary viewpoints within those scholars who would themselves consider themselves both institutional as well as evolutionary. And this got me started on a sort of a thinking of what we meant by development for those of us who were using these theories. So I just want to point out that, you know, if you go clockwise, you see this kind of HDI approach, the idea that there is a kind of convergence. We look at nation states, we try and think about the way in which they might be convergent. We have these 5 handsome or not so handsome men, depending on your perspective, a way of thinking about the history of countries and their industrial choices, which have led to many LMICs and sort of their identities. And then the table here, where in some of my earlier work, I looked at different ways in which we might look at sectoral systems, particularly in health, where I do a lot of work, and the idea of kind of the geopolitical context and the industrial choices made under very different political economies, within which industry and innovation in these countries were framed. So on the one hand, in that table, many of them are what we are loosely calling the Global South. And quite early in my own thinking and my career, I came to the view, probably dissenting with many of you, that I do not like this term. I find it quite useless, and I think we should dump it. And I don't have the time to elaborate here, but there is a kind of a danger to this, which is not in keeping with the spirit of the work done in a lot of the innovation systems world, which is, if you look at different levels, if you like, at which the innovation plays out, or you look at different kinds of what Charles Edquist has just pointed out, distinctions between research efforts or innovation efforts, the science establishment versus different ways in which the industrial organization plays out, we see that these countries made very definite and very distinct choices quite early on, which have kind of been swept a little bit under the rug as we discuss them as one group, largely in the context of income per capita increases. And we are now in the world of the SDGs, and I am to that degree a little pessimistic that that baggage that follows us in thinking about the industrial advance and LMICs, the global south, is a kind of a baggage that doesn't really serve us in thinking through the complex, either transnational or subnational questions that we need to attend to quite urgently, whether they be at the level of cities, issues associated with health systems and ecology, or health and agriculture and ecology across countries. So I have become incredibly interested in this issue of how we look at institutional variety, the many ways in which we do things. I won't get into the details, but the methodology then that follows this question of why we think this variety is important becomes exceedingly critical in the way we address what is developmental. So broadly on the left in these blue categories are all the different ways in this community we have, I think, tried in our very different ways to kind of classify and think about these. But if you look at institutional variety and you ask, why is this variety important? And how would we look across theories of growth, innovation theories, development theories, evolutionary theories more broadly, we see that there's some really fundamental intra-paradigmatic challenges. I won't go into all of the kind of epistemology of this. I've written about it, many of you have written about it. But it does seem to me that we have collapsed a little too much in our desire to do national and sectoral comparisons. It doesn't mean those were not helpful, they're incredibly helpful. But the place where we can go forward is to think about, why is it that growth theories, for example, are quite agnostic about why variety is important? Or why is it that development theories largely see variety as a governance challenge? Why might we think about innovation theories in new ways with respect to the institutional norms, habits, rules, standards, and so on, which proliferate? So very quickly, to give you a sense of just a kind of a flavor of this, we have tended to assume that somehow all of these different organizations, all of these different social, cultural, religious, spiritual, other ways into this debate can somehow all be collapsed into this broad category of social. Why that is a little worrying is that the institutional context, particularly when I think of Chris Freeman's own work on Japan, and folks like Alice Amsden and so on, who looked at South Korea and many others, there is an issue that creates this innovation system, allows a whole series of different kinds of organizations to come together. And there is what Abramovitz and many others called sort of the magic sauce thesis, right? Somehow these social capabilities fit together and we move forward. But in this and the next slide, all I want to point out is that this huge variety of ways in which innovation comes together cannot quite be swept under the rug. We have done some of this work very systematically, which is to develop these typologies. But I think these taxonomies, the heuristics we use to make the methodologies explicit and overt, is actually a crucial theoretical task that faces us. What you have in the table here, which I won't describe, is, for example, probably the world's largest effort underway in India and being shared with many countries, which is the National Cancer Grid. It is an entirely new way of thinking about the relationship between demand, procurement, standardization, in order to set an agenda for what kinds of technologies, platforms, and products we need in order to prioritize certain kinds of development goals. I think these kinds of ways in, where we start looking either case-wise, kind of small n, we start looking at large-scale transformations that are taking place, and we try and understand how they fit together, maybe a slightly more productive way forward, especially in the context of climate and health concerns. So I just want to leave you here with kind of what I think of as sort of an unfinished agenda of sort of what I'm calling 4 Cs, of the evolutionary strands that we want to become a little bit more explicit about. Some kinds of knowledge systems proceed and some kind of fall apart. And just pay attention to the red. Convergence is where we seem in innovation systems analysis to be the absolute strongest, and we should not let that go. Cohesion, however, is a slightly more problematic question, and it's been addressed by Ben Tauke and Dick Nelson, many others, Charles Edquist, in thinking about how these systems cohere. And these obviously are national, sectoral, or other differences. The place where we have kind of swept a lot under the rug is what I would call the cognition questions. How were the problems framed in context? Why were they framed that way? What paths were not followed? What norms were let go? That is sort of detailed, case-based work, but it's very analogous and it can be very productively combined with other methodologies, social network analysis, game theories, simulations, many others. So I think from a theory and method standpoint, there is an agenda. And some of these, of course, are a part of the innovation systems legacy. Customization is a core piece of the innovation systems legacy. But in a way, we have combined strands of evolutionary theorizing predominantly at the convergence level. And we have let some of these other strands of evolution go. And I think if we can encapsulate some of the institutional variety back in, we have a very solid way forward, because these are precisely the kinds of places where I see, certainly in my own work, but even in teams where I work, a huge amount of different interest from policymakers, from students, and from individual firms who want to see themselves as part of this system and want to kind of make sense of themselves as actors in these systems. So I think I'm an optimist, but I do think there's some hard work ahead of us. And I just want to say thank you very much to the organizers of this. It's really a privilege being amongst all of you.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation. The 4 Cs, that would be good to see something published on that. Maybe you have a paper you could share. The final presentation today in the panel, as to say, because afterwards Bentog Lundvall will present the closing statement for the whole series, is Xiaolan Fu. And Xiaolan, and she will now speak if you're there. Xiaolan?
Hi, thank you, Annette, for chairing the meeting. And first of all, I really very much like to thank the organizers for having me at this important meeting, and together with so many distinguished colleagues. It is a great privilege to be part of it. This is the Chris Freeman Centenary lecture series. And I think we are celebrating the important contribution and the legacy and the wisdom of Chris Freeman, and also broadly the evolutionary economics and also the national innovation system approach. I think it is important not only because of the centenary anniversary, because also we are at a time that in the middle of a new wave of industrial revolution, which innovation becomes a very important aspect of this whole the new revolution in the human history. And also because we are at a very disruptive time, not only because of the pandemic, the industrial revolution, digital revolution, but also because of the other changes in the global political and economic environment. So at this point, to looking at celebrating the wisdom of the national innovation theory, but also to look at the challenges that we face, and also the contributions that this theory can make to make a better world. I think it's very important, very important. I think this national innovation system approach not only significantly enhanced our understanding of economic development and the innovation, but also it has really guided, informed policymakers and practitioners in many countries, including the global south, in developing their innovation capability. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the new practices in various countries in building their innovation system, in terms of introducing new policies, etc. These practical new practices, again, contribute and enriched this new this NIS approach. So it's a kind of two-way approach. Rightly, it's proved that. Rajesh, sorry. Yeah.
Rajesh, can you mute, please?
And so this two-way interaction rightly proved this evolutionary approach, and so that's why I'm optimistic that NIS research will go on because of its relevance to the world, because its usefulness to the policymakers, and also because the new challenges that we are facing and we need to solve. So I agree with Smita and Charles that hard work is ahead, but I don't think that NIS research is stagnant. I think it has life. It will go on. And here I want to share with you one example from my research, based on China's innovation system, to see China is one of the countries benefited from the wisdom, the insights from the NIS approach, and China's own practices, but also kind of contributed to the development, enriched this approach. So I will share with you my PPT, so that's because there's a diagram. I want everybody can see it. So I will focus on the open innovation systems for development and catch-up. So actually the NIS approach, National Innovation System approach, never suggests NIS is a closed system. It isn't. However, because the globalization in the past 3 decades made this open aspect of innovation system, the global system, the international aspect of the NIS system, much more significant, much more prominent in the whole approach. So I call it an open national innovation system. And China actually has practiced this NIS, open NIS system that within the country, the state, the industry, the private sector, and the public sector universities and the research institutes interact with each other and building their capabilities. They all together form performance, shaped the performance of the innovation performance of the nation. At the same time, China has opened its innovation system and tapped into the global knowledge pools and the talent pools and benefit global markets. So through trade, through inward foreign direct investment, through people flow. And this is a system that the market and the state both played a role in it. So it's not a pure state or pure market-driven approach. It has a dual driver. So that's exactly as Dick and Bo earlier mentioned. It's the diversity and variety within the system give it the dynamics and the drivers to move faster at an accelerated pace through a compressed catch-up progress. And it is dynamic, it is evolving. So now, what I have seen is that China's open NIS system has moved to a kind of upgraded version. I call it NIS 2.0. And in this system, domestically, is that we see the domestic innovation system has been enriched and also being innovated. There are innovations through policies, like Franco Malerba mentioned. The policies, a set of policies, and some are new, some are kind of learned from other countries. By setting up national innovation labs, building the science parks, high-tech zones, and the innovation centers within the country, and also building innovation cities. So this is at regional kind of dimension to enrich the national system. And also at the sectoral system, there are innovation platforms and the new R&D institutions, etc. So all this helped to build the evolution and also upgrading of the sectoral innovation system. So this is within the domestic system, we see the innovations and the enrichment of the innovation system. And also at the open side, the countries has moved on to adopt more proactive international collaboration and the knowledge sourcing practices by strengthening outward foreign direct investment, by encouraging the talent flows, and also by international collaboration. Not only international collaboration, but also domestically cross-sector collaboration. And this multi-disciplinary approach again reflect, what Freeman kind of encourages, this multidisciplinary approach to understand innovation. And this strengthens the sectoral innovation system. So at the sectoral level, we see that this is one of the examples. We see one of the leading firms through an open sectoral systems of innovation which carried out and implemented, in particular through collaborative research and collaborative innovation within and beyond sectoral system, and also within and beyond, outside the country to develop its innovation capability. And such kind of open sectoral innovation system allowed the firm to create new windows of opportunity. It's not only capture new windows of opportunity, but create new windows of opportunity and catch up. Not only catch up, but also lead the development of this industry and become a leader. And again, exactly as Lorenz and other colleagues and Michiko discussed about the sectoral system, the blurring of the sectoral innovation system, we see the boundary of the sector system expanded. Finally, I want to touch upon a little bit of other new development. First is this digitization. This digitization and greatly democratized the innovation and make the innovation much more democratized. And many of the grassroots, poor people at the base of the pyramid involved in the knowledge creation activity through the platforms. So the poor becomes creators and the makers. Of course, this open national system, I finish in 1 minute, am I right? There are challenges. One is the increasing inequality. I think there is a two-way relationship. The intangibles is one of the key factors shape kind of lead to the increasing inequality, especially within the country, but also between the country. Of course, STI also offered the tool to reduce the inequality. Secondly, is about this under the radar innovation in the low-income countries, which will make the low-income countries further lagged behind in the fourth industrial revolution. This is another challenge. And the third is about the dual driver of the open national innovation system, and whether the smart specialization will become the mainstream and the role of the state should be weakened. However, we see the revival of industrial policy in the West. And finally, it's the challenge of the anti-globalization and the geopolitical tension. So as earlier, some of the colleagues discussed the pessimism about what happened in the world. So these are the challenges. And however, I think NIS, the National Innovation System, the role of the state should also provide some solution through international collaboration, but also through the reforms of and the further research in the national innovation systems, the field, and also the broad field in economic development. Let me finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation, which covered a lot of ground. I guess maybe people are getting tired because nobody posed a question. Let me come back to an issue which actually relates a bit to what was raised previously. One issue that also was raised by Charles: causality. Is this really important? Is it illusory? I mean, economics profession is obsessed today with endogeneity. You can't submit a paper with any econometrics in it without having somebody who hasn't read the paper really saying, oh, you have a problem with endogeneity. Can we really pin this down? I mean, we're in an evolutionary system where there's inevitably simultaneous causation going forward and backward in time. What does it mean to say we're going to figure out what's causing what? Charles, you probably have a view on that, and maybe the other participants do as well.
If I may start, I have a view on this, and I expressed the view just previously. And simply let me take the example of innovation policy again. If we, from the policy side, want to influence innovation processes, we have to have some instruments to do it, and these have to be causes or determinants of innovation processes. It's very simple.
Okay, that's a clear response.
Could I jump in on this? Actually?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah.
And other panelists from previous.
Maybe just to elaborate on this point a little bit. If my argument was that one of the challenges going forward is that the theorizing and the way we have collected data has disproportionately privileged certain kinds of national and sectoral comparisons, we run the risk of having implicitly, inadvertently, deliberately weeded out an awful lot of what might be useful both policy instruments and methodological tools that can reveal to us why certain kinds of innovations come about. So in a way, it's an intermediate position. I don't think in a systemic sense we're going to get to a single thread of causality, but I think there are many evolutionary strands, and unless we recognize which ones those are, we're unlikely to develop more precise policy instruments. And I want to say that from the perspective, I am greatly fond of theorizing, which is why I go back and forth with policy environments in which I work in. But the questions that policy makers have has to do with the kind of, I don't think false precision. I think it is precision they must have in order to make a convincing social legitimacy argument for why certain kinds of priorities need to rise in the agenda. And we are in a dangerous world where we are generating a great deal of innovation that isn't especially enhancing of people's experiences. So I do think there are these both philosophical and methodological questions. Yeah.
May I step in?
Please do, yes.
But I think that your question is extremely well posed and very difficult. I mean, now we wanted to make statistical and econometric exercises. This we want to do. But I fully agree with you that this does not mean identifying causality. I mean, I keep saying to my econometrician friend, well, try to go to a biologist and ask, is the lion causing the gazelle or the gazelle causing the lion? And he would say, well, you must be drunk. At the same, so you want to identify robust correlation. You want to, it is not, I mean, we have to be careful that saying we don't like that econometric does not mean we don't like to measure.
Yeah.
Or that everything is related to everything else and therefore you cannot measure. I mean, Chris Freeman is a great example on this point. I mean, his papers of the 60s on the electronic industry, the plastic industry, were based on very few data, but you are making the data talk. So, as Nick was saying before, you start understanding qualitatively an empirical problem, and then you go on and measure it. I mean, Luke and I did in the book on trade, made a major argument on the ground of 14 observations, which nowadays one would be killed. Still, I maintain that our point on technology gap was correct. And we did not control for anything. We simply found very robust regularities that were sector specific and were invariant across countries. I think that one should have this humble attitude toward the number, and without this obsession of causality identification, or now the new fashion is quasi-natural experiments. And, I mean, you go to a village in a developing country, and you distribute condoms to the left and not to the right, and then you ask, what happens to the natality after 2 years? And you come out and say, well, the natality is different. You do the statistical test. This is quasi-natural experiment. This is idiotic, but you get the Nobel Prize on that. So, I mean, I think we have to fight two battles. One, a sort of anti-scientific battle, anti-statistical battle. We have got to repel this attitude. And the other, we have got to resist the mainstream of our profession that tells us what is the cause. I want to find the primary cause.
May I jump in?
That's thoughtful. Let's, yeah, please do. We have a few more minutes on this,
yeah,
Franco.
May I jump in? I mean, I think also I totally agree with you, Ned, that and Giovanni, that this focus on endogeneity and so on, it's absolutely out of control. I want to add something to what Giovanni said, and I agree. Basically, if you have longitudinal data over time, I mean, you may look at series, but looking at sequences and time path, which is different from endogeneity. You know, you look at sequences, one event leads to the other, and even the concept of coevolution is not just endogeneity. Coevolution means that you have a sequence of events that have, are caused by feedbacks, but specific feedback. So this idea that coevolution means endogeneity, I think, is totally wrong. Of course, we have to understand sequences of events, time path, where the time dimension is very important, real time, not, you know, theoretical time, and then develop appreciative theorizing or understanding and so on. So I share your concern of the two of you, and you have to fight this battle.
I would be very pleased if you would propose a panel on these issues for GlobalX. It's going to be, you can do it virtually, or you can go to Costa Rica, as you please. Okay. But I think we need some discussion. We need some thinking about how we can get out of this, you know, what the journals are doing. You know, if you don't have that instrumental variable, your paper's thrown out in many cases, if it's econometrics anyway. Okay, I'm sorry, this is, we have to end, and we save time because Bentolk has agreed to give a sort of closing statement for the whole lecture series, and we'll come back a bit to some reflections on Chris Freeman. Perhaps before that, we could just give another round of applause to Rajesh and the team for the remarkable job they've done in organizing this. It's really extraordinary. I've never known anything quite like this. So with that, we give the hand to pass it on over to Bentolk. Are you there?
I think so.
Thanks.
You hear me?
Please go ahead.
Okay. First, it's very nice to see a lot of you, not least Charles Edquist. We started to quarrel about these things in the beginning of the 1990s, and he hasn't changed a bit. Perhaps I have not either, but it's interesting. But I think you provoked a very good discussion. And
speak a bit nearer the microphone.
Huh?
Speak a bit nearer the microphone.
Okay, you have a problem to hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, better.
Okay. No, I was saying that I had this discussion with Edquist in the beginning of the 1990s, and he hasn't changed a bit. And possibly I have not either. I don't know. But we disagreed that time, and we still do. Anyhow, the reason we are having this kind of seminar series, as I understand it, is because of COVID. Otherwise, we would have had some kind of conference where we all could meet, and we had to cancel the one that should have taken place last year in Costa Rica. But now I would say it's a really pity, but I think this kind of event and this series, which was triggered by this crisis, has proven extremely interesting. I would like to go back to Lewis in England, 2001, where Chris Freeman had his 80th year's anniversary. It was in September 2001. At that time, some people, including not least Louça, I hope he is still there with us because he has played such an important role in the birth of GlobalX. And I was very happy to see him here today again. We had some meetings in 2000 in Aalborg, and we decided to start GlobalX. And at the birthday party in Lewis, I gave Chris Freeman an envelope with a small paper in it, saying that my birthday present, or our birthday present, was that now he was member of the scientific board of something called GlobalX. And at that time, it didn't exist, really. I mean, the first conference was in Rio in 2003. And it was organized by Casciolato and his fantastic colleagues at Redesigns. Now, I would say that when we started these discussions, our hope was that it would foster a number of scholars in the South who could work in the spirit of Christopher Freeman. And I think we have got now, through this Rajesh and his colleagues' fantastic initiative and organization, some really evidence that we have realized a very important part of this dream. And I would just like to end by saying first that I share the gratefulness to the organizers and to everybody and all the speakers from the South, young, bright women and men who had captured a lot of the good ideas. And finally, I would like to say that I look very much forward to the next series of this kind. I know it's coming. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you so much for that. We're at a close, but as you say, we're just waiting for the next series. Okay. And hopefully that'll happen soon. And also there will be a GlobalX in Costa Rica, which will be part hybrid, partly people on site and others who are online. So I would encourage you to, if you're interested, to submit a paper for GlobalX. You have until the end of the month, or the 25th perhaps, roughly by the end of the month. Thanks, Bentok, for that lovely and fitting closing statement. Sorry?
Perhaps people could unmute so we can hear their voices.
Yes. Hello. Perhaps somebody can say hello.
Hi. Thank you. This is great.
Hello. Thank you. This has been great, really.
Thank you very much.
If there's a way for someone to take a screenshot of everyone, they should.
It's just so nice.
Oh, a gallery.
We should do a gallery view. Is someone able to do a gallery view?
A gallery view, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Ned, you have to do that. Ned, you have to do that. Gallery.
Yeah,
I will try to do that.
You're the host.
Just tell us so we all look
fabulous. Your cameras
there.
Come back to Paris, Bentok.
Oh, I love Paris. You just fix it so I can get there.
Okay.
Ned, you have been able to manage.
I'm trying to find out how to do it.
For people for 3 hours. Fantastic.
You did a good job. You did a good
Yeah,
job.
no, it went by too fast. It was just a lot of fun, and it was so good to see everybody.
You did a great job, Ned.
I hope so. I hope everybody was happy, and we got
Thank you,
to
Rajesh.
most of the questions anyway.
Thank
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nat.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Rajesh, thank you.
Thanks all.
Franco,
Thank
bye.
you.
Rajesh, congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
So many nice people.
Very well, Giannis. Nice to see you out there.
Rajesh, are you there?
Bye-bye.
Yeah, there you go. There's your
You are
picture.
there. Because I need to
And we had
ask
two
you
little
all to make the recording.
Xiaolan
Yeah.
was on?
Yeah.
I think you
Hi,
have to
Kella.
you have to give back my host position. No, Ned.
Yeah, how do I do that by just saying end and they'll give me the option of giving it back to you?
No. You can just otherwise let's wait until the end of the
Wait till everybody's gone.
yeah. So that we can close it.
Okay.
Take care.
Want to have a chat.
All right.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Great support. We'll meet again soon, very soon.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. We
Thank
are
you,
really
Professor Charles.
connected around the globe. It's great.
Charles is gone now. Okay.
Hi, Mamo, you're still there.
Hi, Swati.
Hello, how are you? Congratulations. It was really
Thank you.
wonderful, Rajesh.
Congratulations to you too. Thank you very much.
Yanis, hello. Good to see you.
Yes.
Okay, bye-bye.
So, Ned, I think you have to
I
press
don't want
the
to do it wrong.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
How do I do it?
I'll tell you what to do. You can see my name right in the participant list. You have to take the participant list,
Let me have a look.
or you have to right click on the
No.
right hand corner. There are 3 dots, right? Beside the mute button,
yes,
there are,
I see that. Okay.
You can press the 3 dot button.
It
Then
says if I do that, it'll stop things.
No. It will not stop. If you
You
press
sure that's what it said?
the 3 dots, it will give you option make host. Could you see?
It says stop the direct transmission.
No.
That's all it gave me as an option.
Near the mute blue button, there is another button. There are 3 dots in it. Can you see?
Right, but when I click on it, it says stop the direct transmission. If I click on that, what happens?
Then
Okay,
it
another
stops.
I don't
another
want to do
way.
anything wrong.
Just a minute. Another way is that you just click against Rajesh on his picture over there.
Yep.
Just
Oh, I see.
click,
There's 3 dots there. Yeah.
Yeah. You can change over there.
Okay, and it says I can name you as the person. Okay, hold on. And I can choose Rajesh.
Change privilege, no? Over there.
Okay, you should be okay now. Is it right?
Already. Thank you very much.
You're good. Okay, so we don't want to lose anything.